intact. A point here, point there doesn't matter. You've gone past that mark with good news and with a gap up start. These are classic signs of a breakout rather than a normal day of trade. So focus on that mark. You stay here for next couple of hours, and then trust me, towards the second half, the bulls would be forced to run with the tail between their legs. I mean, there could be a bout of short covering. But for the steel sector, a lot has changed and a lot will change. Globally, since we're only talking about tariffs, everyone is curious to understand that how exactly Indian steel sector will get impacted and effective. And it gives me great pleasure to take that conversation forward with none other than the Steel Secretary of India, Mr. Sandeep Poundrik. Good morning. Always a pleasure to have you on ET Now. Thank you for joining us. If I could encourage you, sir, to first paint the big picture in terms of where Indian steel industry stands versus where global steel industry is, and given that US couple of weeks ago has imposed additional tariff on steel imports, what changes for Indian steel exporters?
So just to see the big picture, as you can see that we have just crossed last year 200 million tons in terms of capacity. If we see the growth trajectory of Indian steel sector, in 2014-15 we were around 100 or less than 100. So in last 10 years we have added more than 100 million tons of capacity, doubled our capacity. And the projections are that we will add another 100 million ton in next 5 to 6 years. So if I can dare say, Indian steel sector is the future in global scenario, because we are the only country where both demand and capacity is growing, and growing very fast. The global steel growth projections for 25-26 is only 1.2%, and out of that, major contributor is India, and we are expecting that, like last 3 years, when the growth has been around 12%, we will continue to grow about 10%. So by 2030 or so, our domestic demand must cross to 60 to 70 million tons. And we will be growing very fast even after that. We estimate that by 2035, our capacity will cross 400 million tons. So this is a bright future for Indian steel industry, while overall the world steel sector is not showing such growth either in terms of consumption or in terms of capacity. You mentioned about the tariffs and how Indian steel sector will react to that. So if you see, out of the 151 million tons of steel which was consumed in India and also produced in India last year, only 4.5 million tons was exported. So overall, it is only 3 to 4% of our domestic production. I don't see that as a major threat to Indian steel sector, because it's not a major portion of our production, the steel which we are exporting. In Europe, there will be challenges because of the CBAM and the carbon standards which have been imposed. There will be challenges for exporting to Europe. Unless we are able to find new geographies to export, I think domestic growth and the domestic demand which our country is showing, because of private sector growth in buildings, in other private sector real estate, because of government push on infrastructure, all of that is leading to a high demand or high growth in the steel consumption. Another factor which I would like to point out at this point is that in terms of per capita, we have crossed 100 kilograms per capita this year. Now we are 104 in 24-25. And this is generally considered an inflection point. because now our population is stabilizing while our economy is growing very fast. So even in terms of per capita, I would say that by 2030, we should cross about 160 kgs, and by 2035, we should be about 220 to 30 kgs, which is the world average right now. So I would say that Indian steel sector is showing promise overall in the world scenario, and there are good days ahead for the steel sector.
If Indian steel sector is growing, the kind of data points which you shared in terms of demand, they are encouraging. Why is the steel sector in India always crying for duty protection? If they're so good, then why do they need the crutches? Their smile on your face tells me something you know.
Yeah, no, there are two things. One, I didn't say that. So the main thing is the dumping. When China's production is more or less at the same level while the demand is going down, the kind of prices which are offered in the international market, directly or indirectly through other countries with which we have FTAs, that definitely affects the domestic steel industry. So if you see the prices which are being offered for last 2 years, even after we have imposed the safeguard duty, the prices are very competitive. The prices have gone down. So, and the second factor which we always fail to recognize is that about 47% of India's steel is produced by small producers. So while we always talk about the integrated steel producers, which are six, they produce about 53% of India's steel, but 47% is produced by about 2,000 small producers. And so their economies of scale, their efficiencies cannot be as compared to the big steel producers. So there are two things. One is we have to protect the domestic steel industry against dumping. They have to be competitive, but if the prices go down below a threshold, then they will not be able to competitive like other sectors. Second is, I think one more thing, if we have to add 100 million tons of capacity, in terms of investment, it will be $100 billion. So $100 billion from where it will come, it will have to come from the sector. And unless there is enough margin in the steel sector, we may ultimately become dependent on imports if this capacity is not added, not created. So that's why government is trying to protect, not that we want that the steel sector to be non-competitive, but we also don't want that they are affected or by the dumping of steel, which happens, as you know, if we don't take adequate measures.
While we are talking about dumping, let's also talk about safeguarding, because sources are telling ET now that the government is likely to hike safeguard duty beyond 12% to protect the domestic industry, and that the government is waiting for final reports from the DGTR. Could you confirm this for us? Could you give us any updates on what we're doing on the safeguarding front?
No, I don't think, at least in Ministry of Steel, any such talk of a number. So as you know, the process, the DGTR conducted the preliminary investigation based on which DGTR recommended 12% duty, and government accepted the recommendation in March. On March 18th, the duty was imposed. This is valid only for 200 days. And in the meanwhile, DGTR has to finalize the investigation. And so the duty, whether it is imposed, continued, increased, decreased, will depend on what DGTR finds in its final investigation. And government will take a call based on DGTR's recommendation. So I wouldn't like to comment on a number, but let us wait till August when DGTR's final recommendations are likely to come, and then government will take a call on the duty.
One other aspect which really needs to be perhaps brought out is that government has already announced that steel is part of what could be called as non-core or non-critical sector. So eventually 3 years out, 5 years out, what role the government will have in terms of ensuring that the steel sector growth continues? Because if it is non-critical, but the country, in a sense, I mean, the steel sector is a vibrant sector, what role the government and the ministry would eventually play?
I think you asked me this question earlier too, that why we are talking about steel as a non-strategic. And so let me clarify, when we talk about strategic or non-strategic in terms of disinvestment of CPSEs, what the government was talking about is in which sectors government would like to be present to run the industry. So when we say, so there were different methods of disinvestment, and at that time it was decided that steel, since the CPSE's contribution is only about 30 million ton out of 200, so it's about 15%. So private sector can take care of the steel industry. It's a vibrant sector. But it does not mean that steel is not a strategic for country as a whole. As other countries, steel sector is very important for the country. I would say in that term, it's a strategic sector. So the strategic, non-strategic nomenclature is in a different context. When we were talking, that was more about a disinvestment. But especially specialty steels, if you talk about defense, aerospace, the strategic sectors in which steels are used. Steel is used almost in everything, and we cannot remain dependent if, say, supply chains are broken, like you remember COVID, or there may be war. So whatever, supply chains risks are there. Steel is one sector where we cannot depend on supply chain not being there. So we will have to be domestically self-reliant. Whether it's government or private is a different question.
Going ahead for the longer term, is there a plan to set up more steel clusters or PLI-like schemes to incentivize downstream and value-added products?
As I mentioned that we already have a PLI for specialty steels. And one thing which we are assessing is that we are still dependent on many specialty steels on imports. So that is one cause of concern, especially in defense, aerospace, or even other commercial auto sectors. And we are going to bring one more round of PLI, specialty steel PLI, to encourage industry to increase production of specialty steel in these sectors. The problem is that these sectors, many of these sectors, the volumes are low. While the cost of steel is high, the volumes are low, so not everybody is interested in producing those quantities. So we are trying to tailor the PLI in such a manner that low volumes can be encouraged, means industry can be encouraged to put up plants which can cater to low volume. So I think that is one area where we are focusing on specialty steels in strategic sectors, and we will be soon bringing a PLI round for that.
All right, sir, really appreciate your time and glad you could join us with your valuable inputs, and thank you as always.
Thank you. Thank you for calling.
Reliance up 14 rupees, 1470. You know, before I take a break, let's look at like the 2-month or a 1-month chart of Reliance. And this is the outperformance which has kicked in. A subtle one, but an important